I give up the gavel, I hope you will permit me to make Excellencies, dear colleagues, it has been an honor to serve as President of the Economic and Social Council during the past year. My country has been privileged to serve in this capacity 6 times. Although this was my second opportunity to occupy the Council presidency, there was no sense of déjà vu. The Council presidency of the past year, in the midst of the greatest economic and social crisis that has confronted the world in a century, was a unique experience. The whole world was in lockdown. Thousands of people were dying each day from COVID-19. Hundreds of thousands of people. Trade was halted. The global economy was in deep recession. And the likelihood of a vaccine against the virus was but a glimmer of hope. Throughout the past year, the Economic and Social Council was at the center of the intense international discourse on ways and means to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences, while also persisting in the endeavor to implement Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, and to avert the existential threat of a climate catastrophe. These unprecedented challenges required new, bold, and creative responses from the world community. During the year, the Economic and Social Council made its contributions to building the responses to these challenges. It set out the actions needed to provide a vaccine for all. It reached agreement on measures for financing recovery from the pandemic and achieving the SDGs. It drew attention to the special needs of the least developed, landlocked, and small island developing countries. It reviewed the systemic causes of inequality. It identified concrete ways to utilize science, technology, and innovation, especially digitalization, to advance the SDGs. It promoted dialogue and action on sustainable infrastructure investment, and, not the least, achieved consensus on a comprehensive ministerial declaration at our just concluded high-level political forum, which constitutes a comprehensive agenda for action. Unfortunately, dear colleagues, the challenges we face are far from being overcome. As the WHO Director General stated this week, the world is failing the test of solidarity in assuring the availability of the COVID vaccine to all. If we fail this test, we will put in jeopardy the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of millions of people in the developing world, as well as the prospects of a quick recovery of the world economy. Despite our consensus, the developing world has yet to find the financing needed to recover from the recession and economic downturn triggered by the pandemic. The burden of debt is triggering and collapsing weaker economies. With large financial injections, the richer countries are recovering. But the poor are sliding further into poverty, even as new strains of the virus spread to unvaccinated populations. The promises of vaccine unity, larger concessional funds, SDR creation and reallocation, all of these must be fulfilled on an emergency basis. And actions on climate and the environment hang in the balance. There is so far no firm assurance that the developed countries will fulfill their promise of providing $100 billion in climate finance annually, unless there are visible steps taken towards international solidarity. The success of COP26 and the achievement of the goals and objectives of the Paris agreements will be in jeopardy. The Council has the fundamental responsibility, in accordance with its Charter mandate, to mobilize global solidarity and international cooperation to overcome the world's daunting challenges. I am confident that under the able leadership of Ambassador Kelapi, the ECOSOC will respond actively and boldly to meet these challenges during the next year. It has been a privilege to have worked closely with Ambassador Kelapi of Botswana, Ambassador Berisville of Switzerland, Ambassador Kislitsia of Ukraine, and Ambassador Sandoval of Mexico on the Council's Bureau this year. I am also happy to have worked closely with the President of the General Assembly, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, thus aligning the work of the Economic and Social Council and the General Assembly. I wish to once again thank the UN Secretariat, especially all our colleagues in DESA, including Under Secretary General Liu Jianmin, and in particular the Council Secretary for their support and assistance to the Pakistan Presidency. Dear colleagues, within the ECOSOC or outside it, Pakistan will continue to extend its wholehearted support to the Council's endeavors, and I wish Ambassador Kelapi every success in guiding the Council next year to ever greater success. I thank you. I now invite the Under Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, Mr. Liu Jianmin, to make a statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellency Ambassador Mouni Akrim, Your Excellency Ambassador Colin Kalapilla, distinguished members of both the outgoing Bureau and incoming Bureau of ECOSOC, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to join you today as we mark the turnover of the Presidency of the Economic Social Council. I wish to congratulate Your Excellency Mouni Akrim and outgoing members of the ECOSOC Bureau for a successful session over the past year, despite all the challenges and the limitations posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Your commitment and leadership ensured that the Council was able to deliver on its mandates and demonstrate its relevance during these uncertain times. Mr. President, under your skillful leadership, the 2021 session of the High-Level Political Forum successfully addressed gaps, challenges, solutions, and actions related to the implementation of the SDGs and the current COVID-19 crisis. I also extend my congratulations to His Excellency Ambassador Colin Kalapilla and the incoming Bureau. My department and I look forward to supporting your work and advancing the priorities of your presidency in the coming year. Dear colleagues, as one of the main organs of the United Nations under the Charter, ECOSOC has a powerful mandate to foster international cooperation on economic, social, and related issues while promoting respect for human rights. ECOSOC is a key instrument of multilateralism. It is a platform for global policy dialogue and a norm setting that works to foster solutions to 21st century challenges. We commemorated the 75th anniversary of the Economic Social Council this year. In doing so, we reflected in particular on its valuable work, including of its vast array of subsidiary bodies and UN entities that it coordinates. The work of the United Nations entities has been essential for helping countries and relevant to respond and recover from COVID-19 pandemic while building back better for the future. The broad areas of its analytical and operational work include socio-economic policies, data and information management, food security and nutrition, digital and other technologies, governance and institutional elements, drugs and crime, including cybercrime, forest and sustainable recovery, as well as the impact of the pandemic on various aspects of human rights. The work of the supervisory bodies of the ECOSOC confirmed early on the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on the most vulnerable groups of society. Many of those bodies have directly supported developing countries, including LDCs, in their recovery efforts. We should be proud of what the ECOSOC ecosystem has delivered through the operational activity segment, the humanitarian affairs segment, and the various forums, including Financing for Development Forum and the Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Science, Technology, and Innovation. The key messages distilled from the Council's integration segment were valuable inputs into the high-level political forum. The high-level engagements and successful adoption of the ambitious outcome at the 2021 Financing for Development Forum attest to its unique strengths, especially during times of crisis where multilateral cooperation is vital. DESA, joining hands with the UN system and other relevant institutions, will continue to advance the implementation of the outcome document in the run-up to the 2022 reform and beyond. Member States should also demonstrate concrete progress towards the course they made at the 2021 forum. For example, by extending social protection, scaling up investment in SDGs, prioritizing grant finance for developing countries, strengthening inclusive dialogues on sovereign debt, and closing the digital divide. Another highlight was the 6th Annual Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Science, Technology, and Innovation for the SDGs. I commend Ambassador Akram, Mr. President, and the co-chairs of the forum, Ambassador Piligovici and Ambassador Koba, for a very successful forum. The forum called for increased investments in basic science, mission-oriented innovation, modern digitalization infrastructures, scientific literacy, and skills. Lifelong learning and, above all, effective science policy interface are essential. They can greatly accelerate innovations to solve global challenges. Research priorities need realignment with global public goods and require more support from international collaboration mechanisms. Dear colleagues, going forward, the SDI Forum has great potential to help identify STI solutions, improving inclusion, and bring science and policy communities much closer together. Indeed, this has become more important than ever. Excellencies, Member States and other stakeholders gathered just days ago for the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development 2021 and the High-Level segment of ECOSOC. 8 heads of state or government, more than 100 deputy prime ministers, ministers, and vice ministers, and around 200 speakers participated, and did many other stakeholders. 42 countries presented their voluntary national reviews. A record number of VR labs and side events, special events, and launches of reports and exhibitions were held, and ministerial declaration was adopted by consensus. Dear colleagues, the discussions at the high-level political forum reflected the urgency of responding to the pandemic and pushing back against a rising tide of poverty, hunger, and inequality. In the midst of global hardship, the messages at high-level political forum were clear. The SDGs are more important than ever. They can serve as a compass toward building the types of equitable and sustainable societies that will prove more resilient in the face of future crises. At the same time, there was no doubt that progress during the Decade of Action will require significant transformations of the socio-economic system and a renewed commitment to international cooperation and global solidarity. Member States and other stakeholders considered that we must keep our focus on reducing climate change and the environmental destruction or risk recurrent crises. And one of the most common themes at the forum was the call for universal, equitable access to COVID-19 vaccine. Without this, building back better and leaving no one behind will be no more than a dream. Excellencies, looking to the future, the ECOSOC can further contribute to re-energizing a more inclusive and networked multilateralism by strengthening collaboration and forging partnerships with civil society, the private sector, and the youth, building on existing platforms. The innovations created by the Council, including the Partnership Forum and the Youth Forum, could be further strengthened so that all stakeholders have a more meaningful say in shaping ECOSOC's policy guidance. The upcoming session is a critical one for the ECOSOC. The adoption of the Resolution 7/290 on ECOSOC strengthening and head of a credit forum provides opportunities to strengthen UN support to member states in their efforts to recover and build a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future. We will explore how the entirety of the ECOSOC system can contribute to these efforts. I look forward to the guidance from the incoming president and the new Bureau of ECOSOC to deliver its mandates. My department stands ready to engage with you to ensure an impactful session in the coming year. I wish you all to have a pleasant summer. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished Under-Secretary General for his statement, and I now invite the Council to proceed to the election of its President for the 2022 session. In accordance with the principle of geographical rotation among the regional groups, the President of the 2022 session of the Economic and Social Council should be nominated by the African States Group. The 4 Vice Presidents of the Council shall be nominated by the other 4 regional groups, namely the Asia Pacific states, the Eastern European states, the Latin American and Caribbean states, and the Western European and other states, and shall be representatives of a member of the Council belonging to these 4 regional groups. In this regard, I understand that the African states have nominated His Excellency Ambassador Colin Wixon Kelapil of Botswana for the post of President of the Economic and Social Council for its 2022 session. May I take it that the Council wishes to elect by acclamation His Excellency Ambassador Colin Wixon Kelapil, Permanent Representative of Botswana to the United Nations, as President of the Council for the 2022 session. I hear no objection. It's so decided. On behalf of the members of the Council and on my own personal behalf, I would like to congratulate Ambassador Kelapil on his election to the post of President of the Economic and Social Council, and I wish him every success as he assumes this important office. I now invite Ambassador Kelapil to assume his seat at the podium.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, before delivering my statement as newly elected President of the Economic and Social Council, I invite the Council to proceed for the election of other members of the Bureau of the Council for the 2022 session. I have been informed that as a result of consultations by the regional groups, the following candidates have been nominated to fill the posts of Vice President of the Council for the 2022 session. From Asia Pacific States, His Excellency Vitabas Srivihoc, Permanent Representative of Thailand to the United Nations. From the Latin American and Caribbean states, His Excellency Diogo Pari Rodriguez, Permanent Representative of the Plurinational State of Bolivia to the United Nations. And from the Western European and other states, His Excellency Jukka Salovaari, Permanent Representative of Finland to the United Nations. In the absence of any other nominations, may I take it that it is the wish of the Council to elect by acclamation the aforementioned candidates as Vice Presidents of the Economic and Social Council for the 2022 session. I hear no objection. I therefore declare as Vice Presidents of the Council His Excellency Vitabas Srivihoc, Permanent Representative of Thailand to the United Nations. From the Asia Pacific States, His Excellency Diego Pari Rodriguez, Permanent Representative of the Plurinational State of Bolivia to the United Nations. From the Latin American and Caribbean states, and His Excellency Jukka Salovaari, Permanent Representative of Finland from the Western European and other states. I congratulate the newly elected Vice Presidents and look forward to working closely with them on the Bureau of the Council. The election of the Vice President for the Eastern European states will be held at a later date. I will now deliver my own statement. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let me begin by thanking you profoundly for entrusting me with this important responsibility as President of the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. At its 2022 session, on behalf of Botswana and I personally, we are indeed honored and delighted to serve, particularly given that this is also the first time we assume the presidency of this principal organ of the United Nations since its founding in 1945. I take this opportunity to warmly congratulate my immediate predecessor, His Excellency Munir Akram, Permanent Representative of Pakistan to the United Nations, for his sterling stewardship of the 2021 session of ECOSOC. As a member of his outgoing bureau as Vice President, I benefited a lot from his immense wisdom. I will build on the solid foundation he established to further advance the important mandate of this august council. I equally commend the outstanding contribution by my fellow colleagues, Vice Presidents of the outgoing bureau for the 2021 session, their excellencies, permanent representatives of Switzerland, Ukraine, and the Deputy Permanent Representative of Mexico. I thank them for the collaborative atmosphere that prevailed during our tenure, which allowed us to effectively support the outgoing President of the Council. I wish to also once again seize this opportunity to congratulate my colleagues, the permanent representatives of Bolivia, Finland, Thailand, on their deserved election to our incoming Bureau for the 2022 session. I look forward to working closely together once the Bureau is fully constituted, with one more pending member forthcoming hopefully very soon. Distinguished delegates, as I assume the presidency of ECOSOC, I do so fully aware of the associated heavy responsibilities and the legitimate expectations, especially by those whom we serve around the world who look to the United Nations for assistance. This is more so when we are still going through an unprecedented crisis, way beyond what we would have imagined 2 years ago. The current resurgence of the COVID-19 pandemic across the world and its much more transmissible variants threatens to further derail the much more needed global economic recovery. In my view, as we continue our concerted efforts to deal with the challenges we face, ECOSOC's role has become even more critical and is no less important than the other peer principal organs of the United Nations, including the Security Council and the General Assembly. In other words, the difficult circumstances we face demand that ECOSOC must rise to the occasion and play its rightful role in waging a spirited war against disease, poverty, and inequality, impacts of climate change, as well as effective mobilization of both global action and resources during the decade of action to accelerate implementation of all the SDGs. Notwithstanding the ravages of the pandemic, I still believe that the ambitious nature of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 goals remain a formidable blueprint for all our nations to work even harder to deliver its promise. I am fully committed to support the UN Secretary General to address the emerging challenges facing the international community. In his recent statement to the General Assembly, the Secretary General spoke of 4 horsemen who are threatening the world. First, the global geostrategic tensions. Second, the existential climate crisis. Third, deep and global mistrust in societies. And fourth, the dark side of the digital world. I firmly believe that ECOSOC must also be concerned and has a contribution to make in all these areas identified by the Secretary General. Distinguished delegates, the theme of this year's ECOSOC session is therefore at the heart of the lives of people across the world, building back better from COVID-19 while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda. But as we speak, as my predecessor has also just said, today we are going through a very fragile and imbalanced recovery effort to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. Many developing countries continue to bear the excessive brunt and the severity of the pandemic and face acute lack of financial resources and urgent access to life-saving vaccines to support their response efforts. The IMF also estimates that the pandemic has increased the financing needs to meet the SDGs by an average annual 2.5% points of the GDP for all low-income developing countries. At the same time, many developed countries and emerging economies have started seeing light at the end of the tunnel, in part due to better access and successful rollout of vaccines programs and well-funded stimulus packages. One of the most critical lessons we are learning during this ongoing pandemic is that global solidarity, multilateralism, and cooperation are indeed our greatest assets. When we work together, our ability to overcome hardship is unparalleled. We have seen this in the incredible progress of science over the past year regarding the rapid production of the vaccines themselves. At the same time, as the UN Secretary General also reminded us, divisiveness stands as one of our biggest threats. Certainly, the existing North-South divide, which this pandemic is deepening, cannot be allowed to widen further. We are stronger as a collective, and we must immediately address any and all differences among our nations. Failure to do so will only worsen the geopolitical and socio-economic tensions and deeply affect our present and future generations. Distinguished delegates, the road ahead will therefore remain. But there are obvious areas where, if we work together, we can make rapid gains. I would like to take this opportunity to outline some of the broad pillars that will underpin my ECOSOC presidency, and they are pretty much aligned with the ECOSOC program itself. First, swift recovery from COVID-19. As my predecessors indicated also, we must ensure swift recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic through urgent access to vaccines for everyone. Scientific progress that was seen in the rapid development of the vaccines can only be a true measure of success if access to the vaccines is not exclusively for some. True global solidarity requires that our saying that no one is safe until everyone is safe be followed by concrete action. I therefore join the call for the vaccines to be treated as a global common good, not for some, but for all and everyone. We must take urgent measures to prioritize the most vulnerable, especially in developing countries, particularly those in special situations in conflict and emerging from conflict. The current disappointing trends in which developing countries are expected to vaccinate just half their populations by the end of 2021, while some of the advanced economies are projected to reach full coverage sooner, is not a sustainable way to combat a global pandemic of the magnitude that we face. Midway before the convening of the 2022 High-Level Political Forum, HLPF, I therefore intend to organize a dedicated special meeting of ECOSOC to take stock on the progress made to date and how we can bolster efforts to ensure universal access to the COVID-19 vaccines. Second, fiscal space for a COVID-19 response and recovery. We must ensure adequate fiscal space for a COVID-19 response and recovery that is also aligned with achieving the SDGs. We entered the decade of action with an already worrisomely slow progress in SDGs implementation and a huge financial gap for development goals implementation. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, the clear reality now is that any meaningful progress towards achieving the SDGs, especially in developing countries, has been severely undermined further. Extraordinary measures need to be taken to mobilize resources from all sources for immediate response as well as for long-term investments in critical socio-economic systems and infrastructure, while also preserving the environment. As things stand now, less than 20% of stimulus and recovery funds have been spent in developing countries where the needs are much more greater. Ambitious and innovative structural ways for debt reduction and relief, meeting commitments for official development assistance and climate change funding, including the private sector for the SDGs financing, for us for supporting a sustainable the outcomes of the 2020 war. Third, inequalities within and between. The pandemic has evidently hit harder on the most vulnerable in our societies, with its multi-effects on health, the economy, food security, and education. COVID-19 pandemic has exposed and further exacerbated persisting inequalities within and between countries, socio-economic inequalities in access to quality services and digital technologies have also been worsened as digital transformation sped up during the pandemic, when remote work, online health services, and learning became the new normal. This crisis is having a particularly devastating effect on vulnerable groups in the labor market, including the youth, women, and migrant workers who are deployed in the hardest hit sectors of our economies. In particular, women have been disproportionately affected as they are placed at the intersection of many disadvantages, thus worsening gender inequality. The irony is that even before the pandemic, the extent of the inequality gaps was also extremely prevalent in middle-income countries, including my own country, Botswana. This does not sit well at all, especially for countries that are presumably economically doing very well. Given that the situation will worsen after the pandemic, I am convinced that ECOSOC should devote sufficient time to promote dialogue on what is required to decisively address the root causes of persistent inequalities within and between countries, and thus reinforce national and international efforts to promote equality. ECOSOC should continue exploration of the interlinkages between inequalities, structural racism, and the Sustainable Development Goals, building on the important groundwork begun by my predecessor, His Excellency Munir Akram. I believe that we can do more to identify and address the real root causes of inequalities and its interlinkages, such as structural racism. These are matters of serious concern which warrant our focus through dedicated discussions as ECOSOC. Fourth, resuming development after conflicts. Post-conflict recovery the recurrent challenges that threaten durable peace and security, in addition to other pre-existing multidimensional challenges of environmental stress, extreme weather conditions, and climate change, food insecurity, and hunger, as well as rising rates of poverty. ECOSOC has an opportunity to better utilize the newly mandated meeting on transition from relief to development to deliver on our mandates, particularly on the situations in the Sahel and Haiti given their challenges. To complement the work performed by other UN organs and relevant bodies, I intend to leverage the role of ECOSOC to effectively assist countries emerging from conflict to return onto the road to long-term and sustainable development. This can be achieved by further strengthening the relationship between ECOSOC and such important bodies like the Peacebuilding Commission through the joint meetings in order to ensure more integrated support by the UN Development System on humanitarian development activities and support to peaceful societies. Fifth, science, technology, and innovation, STI. This pandemic has underscored the importance of transfer of technology, knowledge sharing, and scaling up support for innovation and technology as a means to build resilience and overcoming pressing challenges. Advances in science, technology, and innovation, STI, have accelerated during the pandemic, certainly with promise for achieving the SDGs. But let us be clear that unless we close the digital divide and support the creation of knowledge everywhere, the pressing challenges, including inequalities within and between countries, will continue to fester and widen. For instance, if we can work to close gaps in skills and data literacy and reverse the setbacks incurred in access to education during the COVID-19 pandemic, we can move towards leveraging the full potential of human capabilities. I therefore count on your continued active engagement at the multi-stakeholder STI Forum to advance innovation, creative and ambitious STI strategies and policies to leapfrog our countries to achieve the fourth industrial revolution. Sixth, climate crisis and biodiversity loss. The past decade has been the hottest on record, with global temperatures already risen 1.2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. As already observed by many, this is dangerously close to the 1.5 degrees limit in the Paris Accord. The escalation in the frequency of extreme weather events we are facing globally, including the catastrophic heat waves, the hurricanes, floods, and droughts, is nature's painful reminder of the urgent need to address climate change and biodiversity loss. Again, we know the situation that the least contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, especially the most vulnerable, the seeds, the LDCs, and the LLDCs, are unfortunately heavily shouldering the impact. We should also support ambitious and post-2020 biodiversity framework at the 15th meeting of the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, and scale up ambition for sustainable use of oceans through Ocean Conference. ECOSOC also has an important role to contribute on the follow-up to COP16 by encouraging further efforts to incorporate climate resilience into COVID-19 response and recovery initiatives, implementation of effective adaptation measures, especially in the most vulnerable countries, including by investing in climate resilient technologies and early warning systems, as well as address socio-economic dimensions of climate change. I have already initiated informal exchange of views with the incoming President of the General Assembly on how our two charter bodies can jointly advance the climate agenda. The outcomes of joint engagement between the General Assembly and ECOSOC, together with other stakeholders, should feed perfectly into the SDGs that will be reviewed at the 2020 HLPF on oceans and biodiversity. 7. Inclusivity and partnerships. As ECOSOC, our efforts to address the global challenges we face cannot alone be sufficient if exclusively confined to intergovernmental engagements and without the input of those that are directly affected or have a contribution to make to reinforce our decision-making processes. The VNR's processes and other informal panel discussions that were also convened during the 2021 session are amongst several other examples confirming that ECOSOC has since embraced the value of diversity of contributions through multi-stakeholder engagement. The Council should therefore continue to serve as a formidable platform for inclusive dialogue, as my predecessor also said, and to foster partnerships involving also the views of non-governmental organizations, civil society, and private sector, as the Undersecretary General also said. In fact, Goal 17 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development does recognize the important contribution the private sector in particular can make if we are to achieve the SDGs. 8. Investing on the youth. As part of the inclusion agenda, I particularly look forward to the ECOSOC Youth Forum and to hearing from the global youth as an inspiration for our work in ECOSOC and HLPF on how we can, with their involvement, keep the compass of the SDGs in the current crisis. We should also leverage the strength of other global initiatives that play a prominent role in championing partnerships for opportunities for the youth, such as the Generation Unlimited Gen U, which some of our global leaders are already actively engaged together with UNICEF. During the 2022 ECOSOC session, and within the confines of the established procedures, I will continue the work already started to ensure that the Council serves as a unique platform for inclusive dialogue and to foster partnerships with all relevant stakeholders. Distinguished delegates, these were some of the broad themes I wanted to share around the work of ECOSOC and its subsidiary bodies in the HLPF this year to support international solidarity and an SDG-guided recovery from the pandemic. Let me add before I conclude that the HLPF in July 2022 will culminate 1 year of ECOSOC segments, forums, and other meetings of subsidiary bodies. The HLPF will take stock of the continuing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the SDGs, in particular, examining in-depth goals number 4 on education, goal number 5 on gender, goal number 14 on oceans, goal number 15 on biodiversity, and goal number 17 on means of implementation and partnerships. We will, in the HLPF process, take a critical look to determine whether our response and recovery efforts are moving us on the path towards realizing the SDGs. My expectation is that the forum should adopt a strong and hopefully another consensus-based declaration with a limited number of recommendations for transformative policy action, with emphasis, of course, also on international solidarity and multilateralism, given the challenges that we face. To support an outcome of that nature, I believe that the PNR's process is an important mechanism for knowledge sharing, peer learning, and high-level leadership buy-in in the implementation of the SDGs. I will soon issue invitations for countries to voluntarily express interest to present their VNRs during the HLPF in July 2022. I encourage those countries that intend to do so to carry out innovative, evidence-based, and inclusive VNR's processes. As the Undersecretary General said, at the just ended 2021 session, we had 42 VNR's presentations, which is a commendable participation given the impact of the COVID-19. While I will encourage as many countries as possible to volunteer, it is also my view that we should aim to maximize the value of the VNR process. We should allow reasonable interactive discussion with the presenting countries. To the extent possible, I plan to suggest an approach that will limit the number of VNR's presentations at the next session so as to ensure enough time for meaningful interaction on each review. We will certainly give priority to first-time presenters while also ensuring a balance in diversity among presenting countries. I will also continue to make good use of the group of friends on VNRs, which has been led thus far with great success by our Vice President, outgoing Vice President, Ambassador Sandoval of Mexico. Also important is to ensure adequate follow-up to the VNR's implementation process in all countries. I am delighted that the recent reforms of the UN development system and the 2020 QCPR have provided sufficient guidance on how the United Nations can help make this happen in program countries. This will be part of the discussions at the operational activities segment of ECOSOC, along with the broader follow-up to the QCPR and repositioning reforms. Placing focus on the interlinkages across the SDGs is also critical. For instance, the nexus between integrated food systems, food security, poverty, climate change, water, sustainable agriculture is but one example where synergies can be leveraged to maximize the combined impact across the SDGs. I will count, of course, on the usual support of Undersecretary General and UNDESA to ensure a seamless preparation of the VNRs and an in-depth review process of the selected SDGs. Distinguished delegates, in conclusion, as we start to reflect on the organization of the most immediate work program of the 2022 ECOSOC session, including the newly mandated coordination segment and the partnership forum in January, the enhanced meeting on transition from relief to development, and the process to improve the interaction between ECOSOC and its subsidiary bodies, I would like to reassure you of my commitment to encourage transparent and inclusive engagement with the entire membership of ECOSOC, including other UN member states, of course. I look forward to working closely with the members of the Bureau for the 2022 session to implement the measures recently decided by the General Assembly in June to strengthen ECOSOC and the HLPF. I will also use the General Assembly's guidance to further improve the visibility, impact, and inclusiveness of the HLPF and seek your ideas and views. As a UN charter body, ECOSOC has an important mandate to promote development. Its role has become even more critical in guiding and informing the response to COVID-19 pandemic, mobilizing international solidarity as we seek to recover stronger and forge ahead to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 goals. Building on the renewed momentum of the recent commemoration of the 75th anniversary of ECOSOC, I firmly believe that despite the challenges faced, we can maximize the reach, the relevance, and impact of the Council, its segments, and subsidiary bodies, the HLPF and other forums, to recover stronger from this pandemic. I therefore count on your full support and cooperation. I thank you for your kind attention. I understand that His Excellency Vitavis Sriviho, Permanent Representative of Thailand, and Vice President of the Council would like to make a statement, and I give him the floor. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. At the outset, I would like to express my appreciation to the outgoing President of the Economic and Social Council, Ambassador Mouni Akram, and the Bureau for their excellent work during the 2021 session. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate you, Ambassador Kela Pila, Permanent Representative of Botswana, on your election as the President of the 2022 session of ECOSOC, and to congratulate the fellow incoming Bureau members. I look forward to working closely with all of you to ensure a successful session. Mr. President, as we forge ahead towards a sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, ECOSOC, as a charter body of the United Nations, has a crucial role in deliberation and dialogue